I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Culprit. I think today we were going to chat about, I guess some, not home, I was going to say home shows, but Queer Eye is definitely not a home show. I mean, partially, I suppose. But Nate and Jeremiah, I know we're watching one of their shows. We already watched the um, Nate and Jeremiah Home Project, and now we're watching Save Our House, right?
I think it's Save My House.
Save My House, that makes sense, because why would you need to save their beautiful house? Yeah, I know we watched them in reverse. I know because the Save Our House is in California, and we actually watched the Home Project first, which was in New York, but not that it matters.
Yeah, and we actually started watching, them out of order. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
first, we got both Oscar and Poppy, and now we just get Poppy, and now finally baby Oscar. They're kids.
Yeah, and I know I say it every time she comes on the screen, but I love Poppy. She's just freaking adorable. She's adorable.
She's super cute. But, yeah, we started watching them because, Jeremiah replaced Bobby on Queer Eye, and we both really liked Bobby, and we were worried that we wouldn't like Jeremiah, but of course we loved him, and so that's why we decided to start watching his and Nate's show.
Yeah, and I really did like Bobby, and, I mean, I kinda feel like they could replace somebody else, but we don't need to mention that. But, yeah, and I'm like, "Oh, I got somebody new." I mean, they've had how many, what was it? 8 seasons, and I like everybody, but then Jeremiah came in. Like you said, we love Jeremiah. He's so emotional. He's so, genuine. I mean, you just can't manufacture that kinda thing.
I just really love his emotions. I feel his, tears and, just how he really, he feels what I guess the heroes in Queer Eye, they're called, and, like, with the clients, he has, like, a lot of empathy, I feel like.
A lot, yeah, and it's not I don't know, sometimes I feel like when somebody's really successful or they're, like, on a TV show and they try to relate, it comes across, like, real insincere or, like, he comes across so sincere, and it's not, "Gee, I'm on TV, let me, manufacture some tears so, the viewers will think I'm a good guy." It just comes, like, from such a place of, I don't know, empathy, I guess, kindness.
Yeah, I agree, and I actually think that's why I don't wanna say I'm glad Queer Eye's ending because I really love all of them, but it does very much feel I think they're on Bravo now, and it feels like a Bravo show where so much of it feels edited and manufactured, and obviously, with any reality show, which I know the home shows are too, that's gonna be the case, but with Jeremiah, he feels more genuine than I feel like with, like, their cuts to, like, them at the whatever house they're in DC now, that feels really staged, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know why the longer something is on. I mean, I'm curious. I don't exactly remember the first season or the first couple seasons of Queer Eye, but I feel like the longer a show is on, the more successful. They can't just go with what made it successful. They have to, let's add some like corny music. Let's add some touchy-feely. I don't know. Yeah, like we're all trying to be extra, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just I don't know if stylized is the right word, it's just they're trying to add on too much, like, they've gone away from the core, I guess, theme or message or tone or whatever that it started off with.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I really like, Tan and I really like JVN, but I've never liked when they come into somebody's house and they immediately start going through it, and I get going through, the closets and seeing the clothes and how they can help, but it's not they don't make fun of them because they're all really good too, but, trying on their clothes or you know what I mean? It's like they take a jab at them, and I don't really think that that's necessary. We get they need help, you know?
Yeah, and I definitely feel like they're told to do that, so, like, they're, like,
Right.
highlighting, like, the before and after, like, the producers are telling them to do that or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, you could just go in the bedroom, look at what a disaster it is, take out a few clothes without, like, modeling them or I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure that they're told that, and I get that they're you tune in for them, but it just seems like it's really about them as opposed to the client. Not always, but especially with Anthony, I'm sorry. I just come on. I mean What is the point? I mean, I feel like everybody else has like kind of a heavy, task ahead of them. And what does he do? He contacts a local restaurant and then maybe they make a meal and then maybe he acts like he's going to talk about their past or something, which I don't stay in your lane. Maybe that's a little harsh, but he seems super insincere.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like with most so there's been a couple, people that, are the heroes, whatever, that haven't, like, known really, like, they don't do a lot of cooking and stuff, and I could kind of see where he's more helpful then if he's, like, giving them tips and stuff, but with so many of them, they already cook and he's showing them, 1 meal. Is that really doing a whole bunch for him?
Right, and I can't think of a specific episode, but I know there's been a couple where, like, it's a single mom or it's, somebody that works 3 jobs or, has a really busy life, and I'm all for, using fresh ingredients and, all of those things, but acting like, every day they're going to and it's not that necessarily that they're so elaborate, but, like, they're barely, keeping their head above water. Maybe give them, like, some simple tips or hey, here's some shortcuts from the grocery store. I don't know. Be more helpful, I guess. Right?
No, I completely agree. I feel like along with that, I understand, like, for him, like, cooking is, like, a relaxing thing, and I know that's, like, lots of people feel that way, but, for people who are really pressed on time, it's not always that, and they don't need or want an elaborate meal every night, and I feel like that's kind of what he always steers them towards.
Yeah, and maybe it's because he's a chef. You're gonna think it's weird if he, shows somebody how, to add some extra veg into their kid's meal or, here's some simple takeaways. But I honestly think like the audience, because, lots of people are busy, almost everyone is busy, that would actually be more helpful. We have the internet, we have recipe books. If we want to look for something, fancier, we people can go find that on their own. But that's probably a little harsh.
I don't know, I think what, like, the others meet them where they're at, like, I feel like, Bobby and Jeremiah, they both design a space centered on and focused on what the homeowners need, or, like, Tan, like, I'm sure, like, his style preferences are sometimes a bit different than what he gives the clients, which with what they feel comfortable with, but, like, with them, again, they're meeting them where they're at.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And I also think Tan is like super good with not just putting himself like, yeah, this is what I would always suggest or this is what I would wear because he's rather stylish. Yeah, he completely meets them where they are if they have like, a body issue or whatever. He never tries to fit them in something that I don't know, like a designer sponsor or something. He really does try to think, okay, this is what's going to make the person comfortable. This is a step up from where they are. I'm not trying to, say they need to wear a suit every day. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like with, like, Nate and Jeremiah, again, they do the same thing, like, I don't know how many times, like, they've said with, like, a specific client, like, "Oh, we're gonna do color, we don't like color," but again, they're doing what the people want.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, and they do really good about trying to do, if there's something that they can't do money wise or that actually won't, work in the space or time constraint, they're really clear about saying that. And you're right. They don't like color, but they don't try to, turn everybody's house into like this white, clean state. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, I'd recommend, both Nate and Jeremiah shows and a Queer Eye, that, those are our 2 cents, I suppose.
yeah, definitely.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I was just gonna say maybe sometimes it's nice to watch something like that. I don't like reality, TV. I don't really categorize that as either of those as reality TV. I mean, I guess you could say they were, but I think of like Love Island or something as reality TV. But sometimes it's nice to have something just, there's generally something happy at the end and, it doesn't take a lot of brain power to like, follow on a show or it's nice escapism, I guess.
No, I definitely agree. You know that, I really love my home shows. I never think I'm gonna buy a house or anything. I just really like, "Oh, they look for houses. They looked for a house in the UK. Oh, look, they've designed their house. I like that design." It's just kinda nice.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we'll have to talk about some of the other shows that, we enjoy watching too, home type shows at another point.
Yeah, because that's really the only reality, I mean, besides, like, baking stuff, like, the Great British Baking Show or, as we talked about, like, with Holiday Baking Championships, I think that's pretty much it. We're not, like, really into no shade if, like, like the Real Housewives and stuff, I get they're entertaining, but that's not really our bag.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually used to kinda get a kick out of Top Chef. I don't think you ever watched Top did you ever watch Top Chef? Any of
I
them?
did, I didn't love it.
Yeah, I mean, it might because I liked Padma, but you know, I don't eat or really wanna watch people take apart some kind of animal, so it was a little too meat heavy just for me personally, but I mean, I liked I don't know, the competition kind of that, but yeah, definitely. I mean, GBBS is really the only, cooking show that everybody should watch.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Alrighty then.
Alright.
So we're back for part two on Graham Young. Last time we learned how Graham spent his younger years obsessing over poisons and idolizing poisoners like Dr. Holly Harvey Crippen, not to mention scaring the other children away by going on about Hitler and the occult. He soon escalated by poisoning his classmate Christopher Williams, his father Fred, his sister Winifred, and his stepmother Molly. Although he wasn't charged with murdering Molly with thallium, he was sent to Broadmoor Maximum Security Mental Hospital for his other crimes. Inside, Graham made minimal effort in pretending to have been rehabilitated, yet the powers that be saw fit to release him after only 8 years. Unsurprisingly, he wasted no time before replenishing his supplies and doctoring more drinks. But now that he was back out in the world, he also needed to get a job. He applied to the photographic instruments company John Hadland Laboratories in Bovingdon, Hertfordshire, and once they received reassurance from Broadmoor that Graham had fully recovered from a personality disorder, they hired him, completely in the dark about his past conviction.
In a turn of events that won't shock any of us, in June 1971, around 3 months after Graham started at John Hadland Laboratories, the storeroom manager, 59-year-old Bob Eagle, began suffering from dizziness, diarrhea, cramps, and nausea. Graham's boss recuperated after a holiday, but this reprieve was short lived. The day after Bob came back to work, his illness became worse than ever. His fingers went numb and he experienced debilitating pain. By the time he was admitted to the hospital, his entire body had gone numb and he had lost the ability to move. Tragically, Bob died in agony less than 2 weeks later on July 7th. An autopsy was conducted in which it was determined that Bob had died from bronchopneumonia as a complication of Guillain Barre syndrome, an autoimmune disorder which sees the body's immune system attacking part of the peripheral nervous system, resulting in nerve inflammation that can cause paralysis.
Graham chose to respond to Bob's death in two ways. First, he put on his imaginary lab coat and speculated about what could have caused Bob's symptoms.
How very helpful.
Oh, I'm sure everyone in earshot was thrilled to hear Graham's opinion. Second, Graham commented on how sad it was that Bob had survived World War II only to be taken out by some strange virus. It was this performative concern that led to him being selected to come to Bob's cremation with the company's managing director. For Graham, one of the main perks of his new job at Hadlands was the large victim pool. In contrast to the way he had concentrated on targeting his family members one after the other in his youth, Graham could now poison multiple people at the same time.
Which is terrifying, his poor, unsuspecting coworkers.
I know. Around the same time that Bob originally started staying homesick, the first supposed friend Graham had made at the firm, 41-year-old Ron Hewitt, came down with a similar illness that first materialized in a burning sensation in his throat after drinking one of Graham's cups of tea. Ron had actually been planning to quit, but had stuck around to train Graham to take over his post. And Graham wasn't one to leave any good deed unpunished. Doctors threw out the possibilities of gastric flu or food poisoning, but whatever it was began to clear up after Ron took some time off work. Over the course of 3 weeks, Ron got sick 12 times in all, each time falling ill for a few days after he had recuperated enough to return to work and had stopped by the break room for a beverage. He only made a full recovery once he left Hadlands for good 2 days after Bob's death.
12 times is a lot. I'm glad he got the hell out of there.
Seriously, thank God, if only the others did too.
Yeah. Those who remained at the company continued to be struck down by this unexplainable illness. In September 1971, 56-year-old local counselor and part time employee Fred Biggs and import export manager Peter Buck started experiencing symptoms. Like Bob Eagle, Fred had always been happy to lend Graham cigarettes or money for his bus fare. But these acts of goodwill weren't enough to protect them from Graham's poisonous hand. The unsettling reality was that no employee was safe from the so called Bovingdon Bug, which was assumed to be a mutation of the stomach flu that had afflicted several village children earlier in the year. So many employees were out sick with a seemingly extreme case of food poisoning that caused hallucinations, sexual dysfunction, hair loss, paralysis, vomiting, and cramps that the firm explored a number of explanations, such as water contamination and radioactive contamination from the neighboring Old Bovington airfield. The medical officer of health even searched the factory premises but couldn't find anything amiss. No closer to answers, employees continued contracting this strange sickness, often after drinking a cup of tea prepared by one particular coworker.
It was October 1971, and 24-year-old Graham Young was talking with fellow storeman 39-year-old Jethro Bat. The pair made a habit of staying late at Hadlands to avoid the traffic they would often encounter when Jethro dropped Graham off at his bedsit in Hemel Hempstead on his own way home. In the middle of their conversation, Graham casually commented that it was easy to poison someone and make it look like natural causes. Whether Jethro thought this was an odd comment or not, he must have assumed Graham was speaking hypothetically because he felt safe enough to accept the cup of coffee Graham had made for him when he had stepped out of the room. But after Jethro took a drink, he immediately threw the rest of the bitter tasting beverage away. Graham watched on in amusement and asked, "Do you think I'm trying to poison you?"
He got way too much joy watching the effects of his actions.
If he wasn't such a despicable human being, I would almost admire his brazenness. Although Jethro laughed along with Graham at the time, 20 minutes later, he too seemed to have fallen victim to the Bovingdon bug. After recovering from vomiting and severe leg pain, he was struck down by the sickness again. A few days into the second spell, Jethro was in so much pain that he told his wife he wanted to die. Agony wasn't all he had to contend with, though. Jethro began losing his hair and hallucinating and ended up in the hospital for several weeks.
Another employee who ended up in the hospital was named Dave Tilson. During his stay, he also lost his hair as well as more than 1 stone, or 14 pounds, before he was well enough to head home. But he almost never made it out alive. Graham had planned to have another go at killing David by sneaking in a poisoned flask of brandy to tempt him with. Luckily, Graham never got the chance due to David's late admission to the hospital and the month he took off work to recover. Even so, while David was recuperating, both he and import export manager Peter Buck were left impotent for weeks after first getting ill. Graham's plan to slip different doses of antimony and thallium into his colleagues' drinks had succeeded in causing a myriad of symptoms that left doctors ignorant to the fact that their patients had all been poisoned. But Graham wasn't just going after every coworker he could, he was repeatedly circling back to the same ones. Even though Fred Biggs had survived his first bout of illness in September, after another workplace cup of tea, he found himself being taken to a hospital in Hemel Hempstead on November 4th, and this time he wouldn't recover. After 7 doctors were unable to prevent a decline that resulted in Fred's skin peeling off and such severe pain that the weight of a bedsheet became unbearable, he was transferred to the National Hospital for Nervous Diseases in London. It was there that on November 19, 1971, Fred became the last person to die by Graham's hand. This final death ended up mirroring that of Graham's first murder victim, his stepmother Molly. because after Graham had failed to kill Fred with antimony, he used thallium to finish him off.
By the time of Fred's passing, nearly 70 members of staff had suffered from a variety of symptoms. Understandably, the fear of further illness and death had spread around Hadlands, and employees were abandoning the ship in an effort to save themselves.
Of course they were. I would have too.
Yeah, I would have been running out that door. They had worked themselves into such a state that the theories as to what was causing the confounding condition became more outlandish, not to mention more xenophobic, as time went on. Receptionist Diana Smart, who had been yet another victim of the mysterious illness, even pointed the finger at Graham, who had curiously never gotten sick, but only by calling him a germ carrier who must have caught them while living in a boarding house with a Pakistani family.
Oh my God, those damn foreigners.
They must be unclean because, God forbid, we'd let a myth that has been making the rounds for centuries die a well deserved death. Despite how off base Diana was when it came to why people were becoming sick, she was spot on in guessing who was causing it. And that person's time was about to run out.
The day after Fred's death, a meeting was held in which the company's medical officer, Dr. Ian Anderson, attempted to calm the growing panic by stating that all health and safety guidelines were being followed and announcing that there was no heavy metal contamination. He insisted that none of the employees had died from the chemicals they had been working with, but his words of reassurance were cut short by Graham, who asked, "Do you not think that the symptoms of this mysterious illness are consistent with thallium poisoning?" And Graham wasn't done drawing attention to himself. When speaking to Dr. Anderson after the meeting ended, Graham displayed his toxicological expertise by again naming the deadly heavy metal. Despite the thrill Graham may have gotten in showing himself to be the smartest person in the room, his recklessness in pointing to the real reason the people around him were routinely getting sick would finally bring an end to his fatal experiments after the firm chose to raise their well founded suspicions with the police.
Once the authorities were involved, multiple forensic scientists determined that the victim's symptoms could, in fact, be explained by the three stages of thallium poisoning. In the first, gastrointestinal disturbances such as nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, constipation, and diarrhea appear within 48 hours. Depending on the amount ingested, these effects can sometimes be felt right away. The neurological phase typically follows 2 to 5 days later as the nervous system becomes damaged, which can lead to muscle weakness and paralysis. In acute toxicity, hair loss usually takes place 2 to 3 weeks after exposure and is the most characteristic symptom, but other signs include scaling skin and psychosis. Because thallium is a cumulative poison, it leaves the body slowly and results in a drawn out illness if, like Graham's targets, the person is given a chance to recover. In severe cases, the victim could die 5 to 7 days after being exposed, most often as a result of respiratory paralysis and failure as the related muscles become affected. As one of the most toxic metals, a fatal dose of thallium generally ranges from 10 to 15 milligrams per kilogram of body weight.
Figuring out who had been dosing Hadland's employees with thallium didn't prove to be much of a challenge. Having learned that the Bovingdon Bug had begun sweeping through the company after Graham was hired, authorities quickly unearthed the true reason for Graham's stay at Broadmoor. In contrast to Graham's story about a nervous breakdown, the reality was that he had been locked up for poisoning the people around him. Armed with the knowledge of his past conviction, a vital piece of information Hadland's higher ups were finally given, detectives went to search Graham's Hemel Hempstead bedsit. As with Graham's cell in Broadmoor, his bedroom walls were covered with pictures of Hitler and other Nazi officials. There were drawings of skeletal figures clawing at their throats as their hair fell out, effects that could be explained by the bottles labeled poison depicted beside them. Their real life counterparts were scattered around the room, including bottles containing antimony and thallium, of which there was enough to keep a pharmacy in business for an entire month, as well as vials of toxins. The next find was equally damning for Graham. Hidden underneath the bed was a diary of sorts. It consisted of a stack of loose leaf pages entitled A Student's and Officer's Casebook, in which Graham cataloged the quantities he had administered along with his victims' ongoing reactions as he figured out how to avoid dispensing a one time lethal dose that authorities would quickly deduce had been the result of poison.
In each of the entries cataloging his experiments, the victims were identified by a single letter, such as J for Jethro Bat, of whom Graham had written, I regard him as a friend, so it's out of the question. As we know, Graham ultimately did decide to target him, although he later said he felt ashamed of doing so. That one remark hardly constituted proof that Graham had a conscience, though, because he also commented that F, in reference to Fred Biggs, was being obstinately difficult for initially surviving.
How dare he?
Exactly. Before Graham could be sure of Fred's eventual death, he had complained, if he survives a third week, he will live. I am most annoyed. Having collected plenty of proof that Graham was their man, the police shifted their focus to getting him in handcuffs. Once they learned that he had gone to visit his father and Aunt Winnie in Sheerness, Kent, they wasted no time in making the more than 80-mile journey to Fred's house. Upon seeing who had been knocking on the door at 11:30 p.m. on November 21st, 1971, Fred let the arresting officers get on with it. Graham told his aunt that he had no idea what they had come for. But as he was being escorted out of the house, Fred heard him ask, which one is it you're doing me for? As soon as Graham was gone, Fred got together all of his son's documents, including his birth certificate, and shredded the lot of them.
The authorities had already gathered more than enough evidence to present a convincing case before they ever laid hands on Graham. But once they did, the police collected even more when thallium was discovered hidden in his jacket pocket. The vial containing his exit dose was whisked away before he could gulp it down, and Graham was taken to the Hemel Hempstead police station, from which Detective Chief Superintendent Ron Harvey was leading the murder investigation. An essential part of that process was examining the remains of both victims. This meant that Fred Biggs' body had to be exhumed, and Bob Eagle's ashes needed to be collected. As difficult as this must have been for the families, the results paid off. Traces of thallium were found in both Fred's body and Bob's ashes, making this case the first in British legal history in which evidence was obtained from cremated ashes. The police learned that Graham had obtained the thallium and antimony at a pharmacy near a Selfridges department store by supplying false documents that supposedly authorized his purchase of the poisons. Graham sold this story by telling the pharmacist he needed the thallium for his qualitative and quantitative examinations.
Investigators didn't stop with digging into Graham's most recent crimes. They decided to look into Graham's stepmother Molly's death in 1962. Detective Sergeant Brendan Hayden visited Neasden Library and learned from the staff that they had put the boy who loved books about poisons to use by sending him to the bakers to buy rolls. We hardly need to say that after eating these rolls, the library employees were suddenly taken ill. Now that he had been caught and his entire history had been unearthed, Graham was eager to be recognized as the mastermind he believed himself to be. In his interviews with the police, he boasted of his brilliance and explained that his victims were no longer people to him. They were simply guinea pigs in his never-ending experiments. He even crowed that he had committed the perfect murder when he killed his stepmother, Molly. Yet, because of the satisfaction he took in hearing the sound of his own voice, Graham verbally confessed but wouldn't sign a written admission of guilt. He was intent on ensuring his well-publicized day in court, a day he would spend denying each and every one of the crimes to which he had just admitted.
And that's exactly what Graham did when his trial began on June 19th, 1972, at St. Albans Crown Court. saying he had only verbally confessed to bring an end to the interview so that he could spend his time resting and reading in his cell instead. Graham pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of administering poison with intent to injure, all too aware of the fact that his prior conviction and time in Broadmoor weren't allowed as evidence. Graham was sure that an acquittal was in his reach. After all, anyone working at Hadland's could have easily poured a bit of thallium into Bob Eagle's and Fred Biggs' drinks. But Graham's confidence rested on his assumption that Bob's cremation would prevent the authorities from being able to detect traces of thallium and his plan to blame Fred for poisoning himself. It seemed that Graham had had the earlier foresight to cover his tracks by giving Fred some grains of thallium to kill the bugs in his garden. Now, Graham suggested that Fred had simply misused them, an outrageous story that Fred's wife confirmed was false. While Graham claimed that he didn't have a motive to go after the men, prosecuting counsel Mr. Leonard argued that Graham's motive came down to his desire to watch his victims cycle through the various symptoms the poisons brought about.
Thrilled with the media fascination surrounding the trial, Graham simultaneously proclaimed his innocence while reveling in his reputation as a cold blooded killer, such as by making sure the press used a photo of him scowling into the camera, a pose that came about when Graham thought the coin operated photo booth had stolen his money. Yet, due to his thirst for infamy, he was annoyed at being called the Teacup poisoner. He would have much preferred the more grandiose World Poisoner, a name he would have done his best to live up to if given the chance. Fortunately for everyone but Graham, forensic science had come a long way since he had killed his stepmother a decade earlier, enabling authorities to find thallium in both Fred's and Bob's remains. Graham had also underestimated the impact his dispassionately detailed diary entries, in which he recounted the poison's effects on his victims, would have in convincing the jury of his guilt. Disregarding his explanation that the diary was the basis for a future novel, after 1 hour and 38 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of all charges on June 29, 1972. Having been deemed legally sane, he was sentenced to life in prison. Even though Graham chose not to take his own life by breaking his neck on the dock railings, a plan he had made in the case of his conviction, horrified gasps still echoed around the courtroom following the verdict when Graham's earlier crimes were revealed. In answer to a question about feeling any remorse for the murders, Graham rather dramatically responded, "No, that would be hypocritical. What I feel is the emptiness of my soul."
So dramatic.
Yeah.
The month after Graham was sentenced, the Daily Mail suggested that Graham had drawn inspiration from Agatha Christie's novel, The Pale Horse. Released in 1961, the story features a villain who plans to use thallium to bump off a number of factory workers. Upon hearing this, both Christie, who was 81 at the time, and her husband, Sir Max Mallowan, were disturbed by the idea. Yet, Graham himself said that he had never read it, and his father laid the blame on a much more deserving entity. Fred said the following to the press about Graham: "How can anyone have sympathy for him? I want nothing more to do with him. He should never have been released." At the end of his trial, Graham's barrister, Sir Arthur Irvine QC, also held the authorities responsible for failing both Graham and the public when they allowed him to increase his body count by letting him out of Broadmoor.
Considering the ease with which Graham had obtained large quantities of the murder weapon both before and after his stint in the mental hospital, the St. Albans jury called for the law regarding the public sale of poisons like thallium to be reviewed. And once the press found out that Graham had been convicted of poisoning before, but had been let back out on the streets months prior to his two final murders, after he had been declared cured by the doctors of Broadmoor, there was an uproar.
As there should have been.
Too true. But as you would expect, officials were quick to pass the blame.
That's so surprising. I mean, that never happens.
Not ever. Having not informed John Hadland Laboratories that Graham had been incarcerated in Broadmoor, the Department of Employment claimed that it was the Home Office that had kept the fact that Graham had been in the mental hospital for his crimes as a poisoner quiet. After the Old Bailey maintained that Graham could only have been granted early release with the Home Secretary's approval, more ass covering followed when a special inquiry into Graham's release was ordered because the related file was kept under wraps well after it was supposed to have been released in 2002, as specified by the 30-year rule.
Less than an hour after the verdict deciding Graham's fate had been read, Home Secretary Reginald Maudling, that is quite the British name,
Isn't it?
announced two inquiries aimed at reviewing the assessment, treatment, control, and release of mentally unstable prisoners. As a result, the Arvold report came out in January 1973 and led to changes to how prisoners that fell under this category were monitored after their release and the formation of the Advisory Board for Restricted Patients. As for the man at the heart of it all, 24-year-old, it just amazes me still. I'm sorry that he was only 24.
Yeah.
24-year-old Graham was sent to serve out his sentence at the Isle of Wight Maximum Security Parkhurst Prison. There, he bonded with Moore's murderer Ian Brady, who tortured and killed 5 children with Myra Hindley in the 1960s. The two murderous men played chess and talked about their obsession with Nazi Germany, with Graham even growing another Hitler style mustache as a tribute to his beloved dictator. In 2001, Ian Brady published his book, The Gates of Janus, in which he gives his take on other serial killers. In the chapter he devotes to Graham, and in typical self aggrandizing fashion, he muses that they were both focused on proving their own perceived superiority, reveling in the power they felt when killing. In what we can only imagine is a less disturbing version of the case, Winifred Young went on to write a book about her brother called Obsessive Poisoner: The Strange Story of Graham Young.
After achieving the infamy of his childhood idol, Dr. Crippen, when Graham's own waxwork was placed beside his in Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors in London, Graham died in his cell on August 1st, 1990, at the age of 42. Although his cause of death was listed as heart failure, some have wondered if the other inmates might have poisoned Graham to prevent him from doing the same to them, or if Graham was the one to pour poison into his own cup to end his prison stay on his own terms. The extensive media coverage of the case of the teacup poisoner started conversation around thallium's use as a lethal poison and inspired the 1995 black comedy film based on Graham's life called The Young Poisoner's Handbook. One fan of this film included a 16-year-old girl from the Shizuoka Prefecture in Japan who poisoned her mother with thallium over the course of several months in 2005, all while keeping a blog reminiscent of Graham's diary on which she clinically noted the poison's effects.
The girl's 47-year-old mother first got sick in the summer, and her condition gradually worsened as a rash that spread over her face, arms, and legs was soon eclipsed by her inability to move her legs. She later experienced hallucinations and was admitted to the hospital on October 2005, only to fall into a coma. The girl, who remains unidentified because of her age, photographed her mother's comatose condition and even attempted to doctor her tea inside the hospital. After her arrest on suspicion of attempted murder, authorities discovered her supply of thallium in a Japanese translation of The St. Albans Poisoner: The Life and Crimes of Graham Young by Anthony Holden. Having learned all about Graham, she seemed to have managed to get around the ban on selling poison to children under 18 and purchased thallium from a local pharmacy by saying she needed it for a school chemistry project. She even ordered some online by filling out the form with her real name and address. The careless chemist to be had documented her obsession with Graham Young on her blog, somehow getting away with poisoning her mother for months by employing code names for her victim and the toxic heavy metal. Beyond using thallium and chronicling her crimes, The high school student took another leaf out of Graham's book by poisoning herself to make it seem like she was just another target. She was admitted to the hospital on October 21st, but after her brother revealed to the police that he believed she was the reason their mother was ill, the girl was arrested upon her release from the hospital days later.
Although she claimed her mother drank the thallium accidentally when she was arrested in October 2005, she confessed to poisoning her in March the following year. The girl's mother had still not regained consciousness over 6 months after she first slipped into a coma. But in light of the family's wish that the teenager not be charged and the presiding judge's ruling that she had early developmental problems and a distorted personality that interfered with her self control and ability to distinguish right from wrong, the 17-year-old was sent to a juvenile correctional facility for treatment in the spring of 2006. In the end, the judge agreed with the investigators that, just like Graham, she had simply wanted to experiment with thallium. She had no ill will towards her mother, and the judge believed that a period of corrective education would be enough to make her change her ways. With fingers crossed that he's right, we can only hope she'll develop more remorse than the poisoner who inspired her.
I mean, let's hope, but maybe not hold our breath.
Yeah, poisoning people isn't exactly a common phase most children grow out of. Next time, we'll be discussing the case of Sheila Garvey and Brian Tevendale.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case for us to discuss, you can email us at culpritpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at culpritthepod on Instagram and at culpritpodcast on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you soon.